The 1927 film Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans, is a visually stunning and timeless masterpiece, which was simultaneously a groundbreaking high point of the silent film era, as well as the harbinger of the new sound revolution which would take over the industry. F.W. Murnau, a pioneer of German expressionist cinema and one of the most acclaimed and skilled directors of the silent era, was offered this, his first American film, under a new 4-year contract with producer William Fox. The story of Sunrise is a poetic fable of love, betrayal, and redemption, visually portrayed with evocative symbolism and surreal imagery. Karl Mayer, a frequent collaborator of Murnau's, based the film's scenario off of a short story titled The Excursion to Tilsit, which follows the arc of a married man tempted to kill his wife so that he may run away to the big city with another woman. Though this story would be adapted into other films in the following decades, the most notable of these features being a German-language sound remake in 1939, Murnau's lyrical and metaphorical interpretation remains the definitive work. Released shortly after The Jazz Singer, Sunrise is not technically a silent film, but instead the first feature film released using the Fox Movietone system, which included a synchronized recorded musical score by Hugo Riesenfeld and occasional sound effects, but no dialogue. Murnau hated to use title cards in his films, and had even released The Last Laugh 3 years prior, which features only one printed intertitle during the entirety of its runtime. He preferred to express his stories through purely visual terms, which explains why title cards become more and more infrequent as the film progresses, and virtually non-existent by the end. He does, however, include some innovative effects within these intertitles, such as when the woman from the city suggests that the man should drown his wife. The word drown melts and slides down the screen as if it were sinking. The film is a technical marvel, with many such creative and original techniques. The employment of effects such as flashbacks and multiple exposure shots were cutting edge, and many of these superimpositions were optical effects created in camera by Charles Rocher and Karl Struss, who would receive the first Academy Award for Best Cinematography for their work on this film. One of the most famous and impressive sequences in the film is an extended tracking shot of the man sneaking out into the night to meet the woman from the city. Filmed on a stage with an electric motorized crank and an overhead track to suspend the camera, Murnau had used and learned this approach on set of his high-budget production of Faust from the year before. Such techniques help to immerse the viewer into the stylistic fantasy and heighten the emotion, while Murnau adds depth to the narrative with visual symbolism and thematic motifs. Reflecting the inner moral conflict of the main character and the duality of man, Murnau's use of shadows and the juxtaposition of realism against distorted and surrealistic elements are quintessentially of the German expressionist cinema, and clear directorial trademarks evident from his earliest films, such as in Nosferatu from 1922. Art director Rokas Glisa accounted for this stylization when constructing the purpose-built sets for this film, by creating a false sense of perspective with floors sloped slightly upwards and bigger light bulbs hanging from the ceiling in the foreground to accentuate the depth. The harsh, defined lighting and minimalist, distorted production design further elevate key emotional moments throughout the picture, such as in a scene where the man is indecisive and worried, being torn between his loyalty to his wife and the woman beckoning him outside, which is visually communicated by his central foreground placement at the corner of two receding and nondescript walls. This dichotomy of good and evil, innocence and corruption, is often symbolized in split or divided compositions created through architectural details and framing, again reflecting one of the film's main themes of redemption, emerging from the dark and illicit night into the purity of day through the renewal of dawn. It is said that actor George O'Brien was wearing lead boots in the early part of the film to physically convey the guilt that is weighing down on him over his intention to kill his wife. The man is often blocked with his back to the camera, or looking down, obscuring his face and making his intentions harder to guess. This consequently heightens the character's appearance of menace. It is not until midway through the film, when the man has a change of heart, renewing his vows by proxy, sitting in attendance with his wife at a stranger's wedding, that the camera finally cuts to a close-up of his weeping face, and holds to allow the emotional weight to continue to build. The extended sequence at Luna Park, involving a comedic chase of an escaped drunk pig through the amusement park, is tonally distinct and at odds with the preceding and following scenes of intense drama and life-or-death situations. This entire portion is absent from Mayer's original script, and likely an addition made by producer William Fox in an attempt not to displease audiences and include a lighter, less serious scene. The elaborate artificial city street set was built outside of Fox Studios in Hollywood for an unprecedented $200,000. Murnau employs precisely composed wide lockdown shots with multi-layered staging and bustling crowds to portray the scope and character of the city. The ultra-modern design of the architecture and interiors feature many large windows, allowing this busyness and movement to always be in the background, even when scenes are indoors. The film would go on to be the first and only to win the award for Best Picture in the category of Unique and Artistic Production at the 1929 Academy Awards. Janet Gaynor was also winner of the first Best Actress Academy Award for her body of work, which included this picture, as well as Seventh Heaven and Street Angel. Although the film was critically well received, it was a financial failure at the box office, from which Murnau never recovered. For this, he was given little control from the studio over his next two films, Four Devils and City Girl, and eventually quit to independently make Taboo, A Story of the South Seas. He died a week before the film's premiere in a car accident. Though the world never got to witness Murnau return to the artistic heights of Sunrise, or see if he would have accommodated his silent style to include sound and dialogue, or if he would rather have carried the banner of the silent medium in opposition to the talkies, his innovative cinematography, visual symbolism, and expressionist aesthetic transcend the limitations of his era and leave Sunrise to stand as a cinematic triumph that continues to captivate audiences nearly a century after its release.